Saturday night, a quadruple header on Showtime. Doug Fischer. Ring TV. Join me on the Sports Buffet podcast. We record the interview on Thursday to talk about Antonio Tarver and Latif Coyote. We also talk about the undercard, which features Delvin Rodriguez, Winky Wright against Kid Chocolate, and much, much more. It's Doug Fischer on the Sports Buffet podcast.
I always feel like it's Christmas when I get to talk to Doug Fischer of Ring TV. Doug does an outstanding job on the website as one of the editors. You can read his massive mailbags on there and everything on Ring TV's website. And Doug, let's start by talking about the Showtime card on Saturday. It is very rare to have a 4-fight card because I've looked on my DirecTV guide and they have this planned all the way out, I think, for 4.5 hours. So this could be a big card.
It's a mammoth card, and it's only been done once in Showtime's 25-year history with broadcasting boxing. So that lets you know how rare it is. They've only done it once before, and I think that might have been in the 90s sometime. So it's been a while, and it doesn't happen often, and it's kind of interesting because the matchups are good, even matchups. These aren't super high-profile fights. There are a few names that are recognizable, like Antonio Tarver and Winky Wright, who are in the co-main event. And everybody else on the card, they're up-and-comers, or they are, established contenders who are looking to get a little more notice in the sport, and this is a great spotlight for them. So everybody's really hungry. The veterans like Wright and Tarver know that they're fighting much younger fighters who are in their athletic primes, guys who are unbeaten. They don't know how to lose, so they know that they're up for a stern challenge. So they're good fights, but it's very rare when you're watching just HBO or Showtime to see more than 2 main event type fights. And so, with just a Showtime broadcast, fight fans are going to get 4. Which makes it feel sort of like a pay-per-view card, kind of like the kind of card there. If you're watching it on TV, you order pizza.
Right.
You're gonna eat, and you're gonna drink, and maybe you have some friends come over, and you make a night of it. So it's rare that fight fans do that without having to pay $60 or so for the viewing experience. Now, obviously, this is not a Manny Pacquiao, Floyd Mayweather magnitude broadcast, not that type of event. They're fighting in a venue, an outdoor tennis arena in Carson, California, at the Home Depot Center that seats roughly 7,000, maybe 7,500 fans. I don't think they're going to have a sellout. I think if they get around 4,000 or 5,000, it'll be a nice crowd. That'll be good. That lets you know locally, it's not a huge super event, but I think it's definitely worth watching, and I'm going to be watching with interest because they're interesting matchups. You have some boxers, but the boxers are matched against aggressive fighters, like Tarver's and against Power, Latif Coyote. Everyone calls him Power out here. It's because he's a power. He's a puncher. He's not a finesse guy. He's 18-0, 14 knockouts, and he's going to be bringing the heat. And Winky Wright, he's a technician, and he's a guy who primarily punches a jab, and he has that sort of turtle shell defense. But he's in against a really big, strong, strapping young middleweight named Peter Quillen, and Quillen, a.k.a. Kid Chocolate, he likes to bring the ruckus. He likes to let his hands go. He thinks of himself as a boxer, but really, what makes him special is that he's a big, strong athlete, and he's powerful. So, that makes these matchups interesting. It's always interesting when you have a boxer in against a puncher. The other 2 fights on the card, there's the first fight of the broadcast is a fight for the vacant IBF bantamweight title that Abner Maris abdicated in order to move up to the junior featherweight division. And a local guy named Leo Santa Cruz, who's unbeaten in like 20 fights, is taking on a tough guy, a veteran from South Africa named Vusi Malinga. And Malinga's claim to fame is that he knocked off a legend from Thailand named Virapol Sahapram. This guy was like a legendary bantamweight fighter. in Asia. His name is legend in Japan and in Thailand. And he traveled to South Africa a couple years ago, and Malinga knocked him out in 4 rounds. But Malinga himself has been knocked out in 1 round when he first challenged for a world title against Japan's Hozumi Hasegawa. So, I don't know what I'm going to get. I've never seen Malinga fight. I know he's a southpaw, but I know he's an aggressive southpaw, and I think that suits Leo Santa Cruz very well. Santa Cruz I am familiar with because he's a Southern California guy, and I remember seeing this guy when he was still an amateur. In fact, when he was still like a junior amateur, a 10-year-old, 11-year-old. And I literally watched him grow up in the gym, and he's a pleasing fighter. He's a guy who's got some technique and some craft, but he's an aggressive fighter, and he's got a really good body attack, and he's a volume puncher. He throws a lot of punches. And generally, when you got guys who are world-class or near the world-class level at bantamweight at 118 pounds, it's usually a good fight. It's seldom do the bantamweights disappoint. And the second bout of the broadcast is a junior middleweight title bout, a WBA title bout between belt holder Austin Trout, who's undefeated, and Delvin Rodriguez, who was one half of the 2011 Fight of the Year, according to the Boxing Writers Association of America, with his 10-round draw against Paulo Wallach. And Rodriguez is a great guy, and he's a really experienced boxer puncher. And I love his inside game. I love the way he can just fight so comfortably on the inside with just beautiful combinations. And Trout's a guy I'm familiar with the gym, sparring with Antonio Margarito and Sergio Martinez, and he's a quality guy. And I'm glad that Trout's getting this showcase to show everybody his talent and his technique, and I'm glad that Delvin Rodriguez is getting another shot at a world title.
Let's touch on Tarver real quick, who I think obviously is the headline name of the show. I've read some rumors on the internet where Antonio Tarver at some point might be looking to get a share of the heavyweight title. If so, what does he have to really prove in this fight against Coyote? I guess maybe if he loses, that could derail all plans.
Yeah, absolutely. He's tossed that out there, the heavyweight aspirations, and in fact, before last year he traveled to Australia and fought Danny Green for the IBO title, and some folks saw that as an upset, Tarver beating Danny Green, but I thought Danny Green was tailor-made for Tarver. But the fact that Tarver was traveling to Australia, where Green is, pretty much his own promoter, and like the most popular fighter there. He was taking some risks, but he brought the judges in his boxing gloves, and but before that fight, he actually fought at heavyweight. He won a 10-round decision over a guy named Nagy Aguilera, and Aguilera's a decent fighter. Aguilera gave Tomas Adamek a good fight in February of this year, and Tarver pretty much handled him. So Tarver's not done with the heavyweight aspirations, but he has goals at cruiserweight that really begin and end with this fight on Saturday. If he beats Latif Coyote the way he believes he will, and I think he's going to win. I think Tarver's got too much skill and experience for Coyote, who is a contender, and he's even ranked by the ring, I think like number 8, but really he's still a prospect. He's still developing. The guy doesn't have 20 fights, And Tarver, I think, is a borderline Hall of Famer. So I think Tarver's going to take care of business, even though he's 43 years old. But before Tarver steps back up to heavyweight, he says, and he told me just this afternoon, because they had their final press conference today, he told me that he wants to unify at least 2 belts in the cruiserweight division. And he'd like to fight Marco Huck, who's the WBO title holder, who's based out of Germany, and there's a guy from Poland who I think has the, what belt does he have? He's got one of the alphabet titles, the IBA belt or whatever. So he has to prove. He says he wants to unify as many titles as it takes to prove that he's the man at cruiserweight, that he's definitely the best cruiserweight in the world. And he says if he can do that, then he will move up to heavyweight. Sort of his last hurrah will be to take a stab at a heavyweight title.
Well, here,
of course, that's all out the window if he loses to Coyote.
Right. Well, here would be my question with that is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the cruiserweight weight class is not really a hotbed of American boxing. Why even bother? Yeah, why even bother trying to unify that and maybe go up to heavyweight and get? I don't know how big of a money fight he could get, because I think Vitaly or Vladimir, plants him on the canvas sort of easily. But I mean, that's the only money I guess you could probably get.
Right. I think he's willing to stay at cruiserweight and not kind of cash out in the heavyweight division, because I think in his heart of hearts he knows he can't really contend just on a physical level with the Klitschko brothers, because they're just so huge.
Right.
I mean, they're just as experienced as he is. They're very talented athletically, and they're smart, careful boxers as well. So
who's the biggest name he could beat in the heavyweight division?
I wouldn't count him out against Tomas Adamek, who I think.
Yep, that's what I was thinking.
Some Porter is still, because Adamek is like him, a natural light heavyweight. He began his career at light heavyweight, was probably at his best at cruiserweight, and is just getting by in the heavyweight division. So, I think I'd give him a very good shot to topple Tomas Adamek. And their respective performances against Nagy Aguilera kind of lend some credence to that opinion. But I think Tarver knows he can make some decent paydays at cruiserweight, particularly if he goes to Germany and fights Huck, who's pretty well known over there. And, he knows that he's a name on an international level, and I think he knows that the promoters of Huck would be willing to come out the pocket to get a big American name to come overseas and fight there. And I think he's proven that he's willing to risk traveling when he fought Danny Green in Australia last year.
No chance of going back.
He knows that he can win those fights.
Right.
He knows that he can. I wouldn't count Antonio Tarver out against any 200-pound fighter in the world. I really wouldn't.
No chance of going down, though, to maybe get the winner of Ward and Dawson?
No, I don't think he can make. He actually has to work at this stage of his career. He has to work pretty hard to make 200 even. So he could probably make, if he really had to, 175 pounds, but I don't think he would have anything to offer. He looked kind of drained to me in those two fights that he lost to Chad Dawson. His body looked a little bit dried out to me. He didn't have his usual reflexes in that fight, and he needed them against a guy like Dawson, obviously.
Now, is Tarver promoted by Golden Boy?
No. Tarver is he's got his own promotional company, AT Promotions. In fact, I believe, and don't ask me to name them all, but this forewarned quadruple header that Showtime is broadcasting on Saturday involves 7 promoters. Golden Boy is the lead promoter, but Winky Wright is he has his own promotional company. Tarver has his own promotional company. Austin Trout is promoted by Greg Cohen Promotions.
I'll bet Bob Arum's not in this, though.
He's got Arum is not one of the 7. he is not one of the 7. Absolutely, that's true. Joe Guardia has got Delvin Rodriguez. So it's a lot of guys. It's a lot of folks.
And that's good for boxing.
Nice. They're working together and they're playing nice.
Yeah, that's good.
I like it.
Before we get off Tarver real quick and move to Winky Wright, who I'm glad they found the milk carton that he was on, I guess there's no chance in the world that I don't know if Tarver wouldn't want to do it or if Golden Boy wouldn't want to do it, but the catchy name in the heavyweight weight class right now is Seth Mitchell. Mm-hmm. No interest in that, or who does that benefit Seth Mitchell?
No, with Tarver, when Tarver talks about heavyweight, I mean he had his experiment with Nagy Aguilera, and I let him know that he can carry a certain amount of poundage and still be effective. I don't think he really wants to risk going back up to heavyweight again unless there's a title on the line. And he says it doesn't have to necessarily be the Klitschko's. Let's say Povetkin wins his next fight or two and gets a little better known in the States or whatever. But if they could get Povetkin in the ring, he would go for that, what do you call it, the regular WBA title.
Right.
It would still be, I mean, for him, he's looking at being a 3-division title holder. You know what I mean? He's looking at but he's a smart guy. He's a commentator. I think he's the best active boxer commentator. I think actually he's one of the best fighter commentators that I've ever seen. I mean, he can hold his own with anybody.
But who would have more to lose, Tarver or Mitchell, in that if that fight were to ever happen, which we don't think it will?
I think Tarver would be able to give Mitchell a lot of trouble, but Mitchell is such a big guy. I mean, he is a solid 245, and he's got a lot of heart. And I don't know if Tarver packs enough power to rock him the way Chaz Witherspoon does,
right,
or did in that last fight, which was a lot of fun to watch. But even if Tarver does hurt him, Mitchell has shown that he's got that mettle, he's got that dog in him, where he's going to get up and he's going to wail away. And that body attack that he used against Witherspoon, that body attack would be very effective against most blown-up cruiserweights. Most guys who can fight at cruiserweight, as big and strong as Mitchell is, and he's not a dumb guy. He's not a wild brawler in there. I would have to favor Mitchell. I think he could probably break down Tarver. That's what Coyote's going to try to do, but Coyote's not as big as Mitchell, and I think Tarver can punch for cruiserweight. I'm not sold on Tarver's power at heavyweight, and I think to beat Mitchell, you got to really hurt him.
Right. How slow?
Keep him down.
How slow does Golden Boy bring Mitchell along in terms of how would you see maybe his next few competition-wise?
They're almost ready to turn him loose. Now he was scheduled to fight Jonathan Banks, who only has one loss. I was at cruiserweight Tomas Adamek some years ago, but Banks is on like a 9-bout unbeaten streak going into this fight. Now the fight was scrapped because Mitchell hurt did something. He had a hand injury, pulled some tendons or something like that. So he's going to be sidelined for a couple of months. But they want to bring him his next fight. He'll probably fight before the end of the year. They want to bring him in against sort of a fringe contender, and then have him go for a top 10 contender, and then try to angle for a title shot. I mean, they're almost ready to take the training wheels off. They're almost ready to let him go.
But not to the Lions. Named Klitschko.
Not to the Lions, yeah, no, he's not ready. I've heard different timelines. I've heard something like 18 months, 2 years, or something like that.
Right.
But I mean, they are ready for him to start to fight contenders. I'll put it this way: they would probably one fight away from Golden Boy doing a deal with Dan Goossen to make a Seth Mitchell-Chris Arreola fight.
That would be fun.
That'd be awesome.
Winky Wright, I got to be honest with you, Doug. I'm an old school wrestling fan, and what a term they used to use was jobber to the stars. And Shane Mosley has kind of become that guy now that I think that you feed to the young Lions, because I think Shane doesn't have the power and the fight that he used to. Is Winky Wright in that same boat?
No, I think Winky Wright is better preserved than Mosley. Winky was never a gym rat the way Shane has been his entire career. Even when Shane was an amateur, he was sparring with professional fighters, and he was, Shane's had countless gym wars apart from his pro career. And Winky Wright was a more scientific fighter, a better technical fighter than Mosley. So he took less punishment than Mosley did, even though Wright has had some tough fights. And Wright has a lot of fights, and Wright is 40 years old, So I think this fight will let us know. It's hard to say because Wright has had one fight in the past 10 years, and that was the unanimous decision loss to Paul Williams in 2009, early 2009. And he hasn't fought in more than 3 years. He's coming off a 3-year inactive period, and you never know. Somebody's been off that long. He's going to have it when he comes back. But I think I think he put in the work. He sees a guy in Peter Quillen who's raw that he can explore him. But I think it's going to be a good fight. I actually think this fight is going to be a lot like Lindsay's fight with Jermaine Taylor, which was a hell of a middleweight fight. I mean, people forget about this fight because it ended in a draw. But I was one of the better middleweight 12-rounders that I've seen that the past decade.
I want to touch on 2 final topics real quick, and they're not. I hate to go out on sad notes, but a loss this week for boxing with Johnny Tapia, and a tragic loss really with Paul Williams in that motorcycle accident. Let's touch on Williams first.
Right. Well, Williams, I mean, his battle is walking, sometime in the future. It's hard to find a positive in this. It just came out of nowhere, and it was so shocking. And it's really sad because Paul finally got in sort of a high-profile fight. I mean, Paul was the guy willing to fight anyone, but he'd never been like a pay-per-view player because none of the pay-per-view level guys would fight Paul Williams. I mean, Mayweather was never going to fight him. Pacquiao was just way too small to get in the ring with Paul Williams. So he never really had that A side to get in to be that pay-per-view B side. And here finally, this kid Canelo says, "I'll fight this dude." So Canelo's the pay-per-view A side, and Paul's the pay-per-view B side. But Paul was the B side who had a chance of winning that fight. A lot of insiders thought that Golden Boy Promotions was crazy for letting Saul Alvarez fight Paul Williams in this that proposed September 15th pay-per-view fight. So Paul has finally got that huge opportunity, and then this happens. He has a motorcycle accident, crushes his spine, and from what I hear, he can't feel his legs. He can't move his legs. But he's a positive guy. He's such a fighter, and on two bright sides. One bright side is that even though Paul just turned 30, I mean, he accomplished enough. He actually has a bit of a legacy. He leaves the sport. It's not like he didn't accomplish anything in the sport. I mean, he won the welterweight title twice. He won a version of the junior middleweight title. He was a ranked contender, a ring-rated contender at welterweight, junior middleweight, and middleweight. And he got in there and fought some terrific fighters, like Sergio Martinez. And their first fight was terrific. It was a Fight of the Year candidate. And he beat Antonio Margarito at a time when nobody was wanting to get in the ring with Antonio Margarito. So he's got a lot of feathers in his cap. His unanimous decision over Winky Wright was impressive.
Yep. I think
he did a lot.
It's just bad though that it's bad though. Sorry to interrupt. It's bad though that Paul Williams' last two fights though. One, he gets knocked out in one of the more brutal knockouts that we'd seen in a while, and then I mean, we can be honest. He didn't get that win over Lara. I mean, officially he did.
No, I mean, and I think those fights told us that his tough style and his willingness to take on so many tough fighters was catching up to him. I mean, he was looking at retiring. I mean, I think had he lost to Saul Alvarez, he probably would have announced his retirement in the ring.
Right.
But, he did enough to where he leaves a little bit of a legacy, and I think he showed us something, his spirit in those fights, that he's going to be a fighter. I mean, he's going to, he's got a positive attitude for one thing, but he's going to really, I think, work physical rehabilitation. And, you know what, I wouldn't be surprised in, 5 or 6 years if we see Paul Williams, walking around at ringside at some big fights.
And I'm no doctor at all, but I don't know. I would feel better about Paul Williams having a chance to walk again than a 240-pound beer drinker at the bar who never moves around in terms of Paul Williams' condition.
Right. Professional athletes tend to do a lot better with rehab.
Right.
They just have this mind, body, spirit connection that us regular folks do not have. So, yeah, I wouldn't count them out.
Johnny Tapia, for people who didn't see Tapia fight, compare him to somebody nowadays or, the past 5-6 years.
Man, I don't know if there's anybody out there like Johnny Tapia, because what's forgotten about Tapia because of the whole Mavita Loca thing, that whole nickname, which he certainly lived up to and died to. People forget. They think about his fighting spirit, and he had that. He would never quit in the ring. He'd fight anybody. But he was a marvelous boxer. He was a superb talent in the ring. I mean, he could stick and move. He had amazing footwork, timing, reflexes. He was a ring general and a showman at the same time. So, I mean, he was kind of like you combine a Jorge Paez with like a prime Oscar De La Hoya, and you throw in that sort of pride of like a Julio Cesar Chavez, like when Chavez was really Chavez or somebody. That guy who just He wore his heart on his sleeve. I mean, like, he had that sort of warrior mentality that we celebrate in guys like Arturo Gatti,
right,
and one of my favorites, Mickey Ward. But he was a higher level boxer than Ward or Gotti, and I'm taking nothing away from Gotti or Ward, because they could fight. They weren't club fighters. You know what I mean? They were world class fighters, but Tapia was a world class boxer, and he was an elite level boxer, and he was pound for pound level for a while. I mean, people forget he went unbeaten in his first 45 fights. He didn't lose to Paulie Aiello. I think he was 43-0 and 2. He had 2 draws, 43 wins, no losses. And it's amazing because he actually lost 3.5 years of his prime because of drug abuse. You know, he came up dirty with cocaine. And he was actually suspended for more than 3 years, and he resumed his career and won a title at 115 pounds. I don't know how many defenses. You know, folks can go to BoxRec. I don't know how many defenses he made of that WBA junior bantamweight title, but he made a lot, and he beat some really terrific fighters. And I think arguably, and he was undefeated at 115 pounds, I think he is arguably the finest junior bantamweight champion in the history of the sport. I mean, you can make arguments for guys like the dude from Thailand, Kyle Sai Galaxy, who retired with a 50-1 record. But Tapia fought a lot of guys, and you know, we saw him here in the United States, and the fact that he was able to, and he really was like a natural flyweight, super flyweight, or junior bantamweight, but he was good enough to go up and win a title, 2 titles, I think, at bantamweight, beat really good fighters to win those titles, and then even step up to featherweight. And the decision he won over Manuel Medina, it was controversial. I mean, a lot of folks thought Medina won that fight, but just the fact that he was able to move up to featherweight and fight the best fighters at featherweight, including Marco Antonio Barrera, and he lost to Barrera, but it was a spirited fight because that's how Johnny Tapia was. That just tells you about his talent. I mean, he was an amazing boxing talent who could do everything but punch. He did not have one-punch knockout power, but he had everything else. He had the chin and the speed and the reflexes and the technique and the combination punching and the lateral movement, the footwork, and he could do everything. He knew the fire points of the sport, and he made all of his fights, whether he was fighting a journeyman or a future Hall of Famer like Marco Antonio Barrera, he made his fights entertaining. He was always aware of the fans, and he would showboat, but not in a disrespectful way to his opponent. I mean, it was just Johnny being Johnny in the ring. He felt so good and so at home at the ring. He would clown a little bit. He would hot dog a little bit. But he was always fighting. He always gave it 110%. So, he's one of the first world-class fighters that I interviewed once, you know, when I first started writing about boxing. And he was a bit like talking to a kid, didn't have any sort of attention span whatsoever, but he treated everybody with a lot of respect, and it didn't matter if you were writing for the New York Times or if you were some kid with a website that you never heard of, like howsaboxing.com. He gave you the same respect as he gave the veteran news writer. And he always seemed kind of honored that somebody would want to interview him. And, you know, he always end all of his interviews. I interviewed him a lot of times, like in the late 90s and the early part of the last decade. He would always end his conversation or his interview by saying, "Pray for me," because he was that kind of person, you know. And you got the feeling that he knew that any day could be his last day. And really, he kind of outlived a lot of people's expectations. Most people didn't think he would ever reach 40. And, you know, he had a lot of, many times where, you know, with suicide attempts and drug overdoses where he was legally pronounced dead. So, you know, when the news hit, when I got, like, you know, somebody tweeted, "Hey, is this true?" I was thinking, you know, it probably is, you know, and it wasn't, you know, it's sad, but he was one of those guys that most people in boxing figured was not going to live into his 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Doug, always loved talking to you. I wish you lived next door to me. You'd probably only live next door for a week before you'd move, because I'd always be picking your brain about boxing.
Now, I love to talk boxing, man. I love talking boxing.
Well, next week, hopefully, we'll get together and preview Pacquiao and Bradley. But until then, Doug, enjoy the show on Saturday.
I will. Thanks, Bob.